Good morning and welcome back to the Mayor's Table. I'm Mayor Tommy Roberts, and joining me again today is City Manager Rob Mays. Rob, it's good to have you back.
Thank you.
It seems that you and I are carrying the ball mostly on these Mayor Table segments, but occasionally I'm able to get a guest in, and that's probably a welcome change for you.
I'm always happy when you have a guest, but as we've said, the response and the exposure to these has kind of exceeded our expectations, so it's well worth the time and effort. I appreciate you having me on.
Let's talk about a very important process that takes place annually at the City of Farmington, as it takes place in every governmental agency or entity across the state and across the country. And that's the budget development process.
Yeah.
You're well into that process by now, and the council is going to be engaged quickly in the budget development process with some hearings and an opportunity to weigh in on budget decisions and parameters. So I think it's an interesting topic that our citizens ought to be aware of, and they ought to understand how that process flows and the goals that you have in the budget process each year. Let's talk a bit about how you formulate a budget.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the budget process. The fact is that we spend roughly half of every year in the budget process, so we're kind of geared up for that. You know, this year will be my 10th year anniversary with the city and my 9th budget, and it seems in my mind that we've been in a continual budget process. But the fact is, about January of every year we launch in earnest the budget process at the administrative level. Ultimately, by state statute, it's the city manager's responsibility to submit to the council a proposed budget. And that's the process we're in. And a lot of people are involved in that, from the early on, honestly, out to the grassroots of our employees, giving input up through their chain of command to their supervisors. And ultimately, the department heads are very active in proposing to our budget office the things that they need, the visions they have for the following year. And then it all comes together, and we put it together the best we can. The challenge, of course, is when it comes to a budget, is you have to match up recurring expenditures with recurring revenues. And so the biggest challenge really starts with projecting, what our revenues are going to be. And we start that process in January. That's 18 months in advance of so we're working on the fiscal year 2017. We started the process 18 months before that budget will be done. And our crystal balls are a little fuzzier than usual this year in terms of projecting.
At the outset, I want to point out that you've been city manager for 8 years. I've been the mayor for 6 years. In your 8 years as city manager, you've never had the luxury of dealing with an economic environment that was extremely positive. And as mayor, 6 years, I've never had that experience and that luxury. Yeah. It's somewhat easier probably to budget in a scenario where the fiscal resources are there and they're abundant.
Yeah.
And it's somewhat more difficult to budget when resources are low. And so I think that's a challenge, and I do want to commend you on the results that you've attained in budgeting and operating in a budgetary scenario that is dictated by a somewhat depressed economy. Mm-hmm. And the fact of the matter is that we're in no different situation this year as you have embarked on the budget-making process. Let's talk a little bit about some of the specifics that you're dealing with for the upcoming budget process.
Okay, well, you kind of go back to the historical perspective. 2009 was the high year for the city's revenue. We dropped off about 22% that year, and bit by bit kind of climbed our way back up to where we stand today. As we closed out last year's budget, we're about 8% below where we were in 2009. In the meantime, with inflation, costs have gone up about 11%. So as we started into the FY16 budget, we have 8% less dollars to spend. So this year's been no different. We all started to have some encouragement with the uptick of the oil exploration and the Mancos Shale, but that mini boom kind of ended about as quick as it started. And so we find ourselves again in a year that clearly we're going to have to project, if we're going to be reasonable, the gross receipts taxes are going to come in next year probably significantly lower than they're going to end this year.
And currently we've seen numbers from our gross receipts tax distributions that are not encouraging. So if you look at the most recent distributions, you'd probably have to project a declining gross receipts tax revenue flow for the last 4 months of the fiscal year, and that continuing on into the next fiscal year.
Yeah, well, you've hit the nail on the head. The first thing we have to do is project. We're 8 months into this fiscal year. There's 4 months left of revenue. So the first thing we have to do is project what will we get the next 4 months. What will that trend be? Then you kind of have a set point that we've closed out FY16. Then you say from there what will happen the next 12 months after that. Where we sit today, year to date, while we have certainly concerns related to the unemployment and the loss of jobs, so far we're hanging in there reasonably well, but the trend's starting to concern us. On a year to date basis, we're only 1.8% below budget. The fact is, even going into this year, we anticipated some loss of revenue, and about 3%. We're down about 5%, and so we're under budget about 2%. The question is, what will happen if the trend holds? We're probably looking at needing to project anywhere from 5 to 10% potentially in terms of being realistic about what our tax revenue will be next year. So that's a tough starting place to build a budget with that kind of a potential hit.
In this kind of a fiscal environment, you're really left with 3 options. One is to raise taxes, the second is to cut expenditures, and the third is a combination of those 2 measures. Some people will remember that the city increased taxes by 1/4% back in August, and that tax increase took effect January 1st. This will be the first month that we realize some of the revenue flow attributable to that tax increase. Some might think that that will help us as we go forward into the next fiscal year. What's your view of how that tax increase will impact the budget process?
Yeah. Well, first, I appreciate the timing point that you made. The numbers that I just gave a minute ago are not inclusive of that new money. So that's not been calculated into those year-to-date numbers I gave you, where we're under budget about 1.82. That new money will start to flow in. That money we have to be very, very careful how we use it. As you know, and we've spent many hours talking about this, that is money to replace revenue that the state is taking from us through the hold harmless phase out. So that money, now the money is phasing in slightly ahead of the pace that the state's phasing it out. So up front, there is some excess revenue. Our goal, and the mayor and council's goal, was when putting that tax, was to be very conservative, try to set that money aside and use it to extend the period of time until when we inevitably will have to put in the 1/3 of that as that state money, as the state takes that money. The fact is that it will be available, and I think that the council will likely have to seriously consider that on a very cautionary basis, using some of that new money to maintain our base. We certainly would not be proposing a budget to build new things into the base or new employees and recurring expenses, but if faced with the decision of without trying to be dramatic, closing a fire station or closing facilities or laying off police officers, I'm guessing that we'll seriously consider using that in a very cautious way.
Our goal is to make the budget development process a very public process. And toward that end, Rob, talk about some of the steps in the process, beginning with the first council presentation through the end time of action by the council to adopt a final budget. And let's kind of move through this rather quickly.
Well, we have 5 formal planned budget public hearings with the council. They begin as early as Wednesday, April 13th, where we're going to deal with utilities. And then it moves through the next step where we deal with our capital improvement plan, and that's at a meeting in April 19th. Then we have an all-day work session with the council on May 3rd, where it's our main budget session where we present the preliminary budget. Then we have another hearing to discuss it on May 17th, and then a goal to adopt the final budget on May 24th. At any point along the way, the council can add additional time and additional hearings if they feel it's necessary. And then the final important element of that is the aspect that you started when you first became mayor. There's a public hearing, they're all public hearings, but there's a budget info session especially designed for the public to come to. And that is scheduled for Wednesday evening, May 4th, at the library at 6 o'clock. And that'd just be the perfect place for a citizen that's really wanting to understand the process, the challenges, and what we spend our money on. To come to that one would be the most instructive, I think. Again, that's Wednesday, May 4th at 6 p.m.
Rob, thank you for talking about the budget development process. It's the most important thing that we do as a city council, and ironically, it seems to be the kind of thing that creates the least interest among our citizens. But I do want to encourage all of you who are viewing to become involved in that process, just so that you are informed. I want to thank you once again for viewing this segment of the Mayor's Table, and we'll look forward to having you back next Monday.